Amazing. Hi guys, I'm Matt. If we haven't met, welcome to Reunion, as Justin said. So last weekend, a bunch of us took part in the Road to Hope Marathon in Hamilton. And I know a number of you didn't, but for those who ran or donated or gave money, thank you so much. Together we raised just over $3,000 to help with partnership with Kerr Ministries, with Young Life, and our residency program. So I was, you always hope to raise more, but whatever you raise is more than we had before, and it was amazing. I just want to tell you a little story about the run. So it was a really crappy day last Sunday, if you paid attention, and I tried my best to run my very first marathon. So it's not about me, but I want to tell you this story because it just kind of sums up my experience. So there was 1,000 people running the marathon, and so we all lined up, and the start time was 7:45 a.m., and like, honestly, we were inside this building to warm up, and then it's of getting time, and the music's pumping outside, and so then I went outside quickly I just wanted to get out. I wanted to stay warm as long as possible and then get out. So as soon as I went out, it's like the announcer's like, 1 minute to go, and everyone's getting like excited and nervous, and then like the skies just open up, and it's just pouring, and so before you've even moved, you're completely soaked. And it was like, it doesn't matter though, right? You're in the zone, you're there to do it. So as soon as we started, everyone's running, and there's a mass of people, you're trying to find your pace and not like trip over anyone, or it's just this whole kind of energy, excitement, trying to figure it out. And I come around this one corner, and we're literally maybe 500 meters into the race, like just barely getting started. And all of a sudden this like really weird thing happened to me because I found myself face to face with this woman. And all of a sudden it freaked me out because she's looking like backwards at me, and I'm running forwards. And then I realized, wait, this lady's running backwards. And then I'm like, I just keep going, but in my mind I'm like, is she okay? Like, what is she just like stretching and warming up? Is she like that good a runner that she's just like, no problem? So she's running backwards, and I realize there's some friends around who are kind of guarding her, helping her not to trip. And then I'm like, oh, I guess that's her bag. Whatever she's doing it. And so I kind of cut around her, and I'm kind of off trying to find my own pace and rhythm with what I knew I was hoping to do in the race. And everything was going really, really good for me until about 25 kilometers in. And then I had this really weird twinge and ache and cramp in my knee that really like messed up the last 17 kilometers. So it was like this frustration of I finished the run, and I celebrated that because I got to remember when I first started getting ready, the goal was to finish. But then like anything, as you kind of start getting ready, you just want to do a little bit more. So I was kind of internally battling, like I'm going to finish, but it really hurts, and oh man, this really sucks. Anyways, about 5 kilometers left, we're running along the lake. And I'm just like trying to keep it together. My knee's killing me, not sure what's happening. People are passing me that it's like bad on my heart, but I'm judging like, oh, how on earth is that person going by me? It's that feeling of like, I'm totally falling apart here. So I'm just kind of going, and then guess who shows up? This lady just running backwards right by me. It's almost like she gave me a wink, like, sucker, and off she goes. And I was like, I totally just got beat by this woman running backwards. And it's not because she was a woman. It's because she ran 42 kilometers backwards. Can you imagine? Okay, so if it's only I'm just like, this is public therapy. I just couldn't even imagine running 42 kilometers backwards. Think about that. That's nuts. Anyways, it was a crazy weekend. It was really, really fun despite the weather. And so thanks for everyone who participated and donated. Excited with what we can do with some of those funds to help do some things locally. So that's really, really cool. Today we are continuing in our Sermon on the Mount series. If you're just with us, we've been looking at these teachings of Jesus and really talking about what does it mean for us as followers of Jesus to implement them into our lives. Not just to talk to them as like these nice statements or these nice sayings, but really to say, what does this really mean for us? So it's like these ethics, this idea of following Jesus and living these principles and practices out in everyday life. So we're in this section where Jesus refers back to the Old Testament, and he'll say, you have heard it said this, but I say this. That's kind of been the section we've been in the last little bit. So he's taking an Old Testament principle or Old Testament law, and he's helping bring new definition, a new, deeper sense of meaning to it, and kind of ratcheting up the expectation for Jesus followers. Mostly to do with not just external practices, like look good on the outside, but it's about internal change and transformation. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So if you got your Bibles, grab it. It'll be up on the screen too. Matthew chapter 5, verse 27. It's a section on adultery and lust. And so this is maybe not what you're expecting as you got in the car to come, but it's a really important conversation for us to have. It's a really, really significant conversation for us as followers of Jesus to talk about. So let's jump in, Matthew 5:27. I'll read it through. We'll talk about some things as normal. We'll get you guys talking together in smaller groups. We'll listen to each other. Regular kind of flow this morning. Here it goes. Matthew 5:27. You have heard the commandment that says, you must not commit adultery. But I say, anyone who even looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So if your eye, even your good eye, causes you to lust, or causes you to stumble, your translation may say, or trips you up, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your hand, even your stronger hand, causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. So adultery in Jesus' day in the ancient world typically was about someone having sex with someone else outside of marriage, just exactly what you would think it would be. Often involved having sexual relations with someone who was already married, kind of breaking down two different marriage relationships. It was definitely a culture, it might be a little bit weird for us to try to put ourselves back there, but it was a totally male-dominated culture. So men had a different standard that they were held to than women. It's totally not fair, but that was blatant and really obvious. And so this even trickled down into the way the ancient world viewed adultery. So just in general terms, in the ancient world, men were held to a different standard than women. It's totally not fair, but let me give you an example. So this is from Cato the Elder, who was a Roman writer and ruler, and he writes this about 200 years before Jesus. So this is just gives you some context to kind of the order of the day. This is what he writes. If you should take your wife in adultery or find your wife in adultery, you may with impunity put her to death without trial. But if you should commit adultery or indecency, she must not presume to lay a finger on you, nor does the law allow it. So it always just shows this major double standard. So men were held to this one standard, women to a completely different standard. Now, the nation of Israel, as they had this special relationship with God, they had a bit more consistency and equal nature to what their standard was for men and women. But there are some things even in the way they went about it that definitely tipped where men had the upper hand and were treated differently. It was completely kind of messed up. So as Jesus is giving this teaching, he's saying, you've heard this commandment, do not commit adultery. If he just stops there, most people would be like, it's great, totally good, it's fine, I'm okay, feel good about myself, puff up my chest, I'm doing great. But then this is where Jesus kind of dials it up, ratchets this up, adds a bit more to it. He brings this kingdom ethic, this new way into it. He says this, but I say anyone who even looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So Jesus takes this principle, this Old Testament law, and he redefines lust to equate to adultery. Because he's trying to get beyond just the external act of what you do and breaking up your marriage and having a relationship with another person. He's saying, wait a second, it's about inner motives, inner desires, what's really going on inside of you. So we think about this idea of lust. So when you think about it, it could just mean, or it's fair to say it could mean like that leering, that creepy, prolonged glance, that staring, whatever that might be. But the root word, the Greek word, has less to do with the length of how you look or how creepy you may look when you're watching another person. It all has to do with the origin and the desire. It speaks more to the desire you have, the intent you have as you're looking at someone. Not how long you look at someone or the way you externally are looking as you're watching someone, but it's the desire that motivates your watching. And that's what Jesus is trying to get here. Dale Allison in his commentary says this, Jesus supplements the law because, while he approves the old law which condemns the external act as evil, he declares that no less evil is the intention that brings it forth. Someone said that it's like your desire, your inner desire, that's fertilized by your ongoing gaze. So this inner desire that you have is fertilized by the way you watch and stare, and that's this idea of lust that's filling this internal heart place. Scott McKnight says, the look to desire is about intentionally fostering sexual temptation and arousal through the imagination. Jesus is against sexual fantasizing with an inappropriate person. He knows where it eventually leads. And we read later on in the New Testament, James, a leader in the early church, is writing, and he says this, temptation comes from our own desires, which entice us and drag us away. These desires give birth to sinful actions, and when sin is allowed to grow, it gives birth to death. It talks about like this, how this all starts, these seeds that are planted, this root desire, you have to pay attention to. It's super, super important. So Jesus is equating not just, hey, Old Testament law, do not commit adultery. He's saying it's actually about the root, the lust. He's linking lust with adultery of the heart. So you can imagine as he's saying this in the beginning, people are listening, first century Jewish context, they're like, okay, it's great, I haven't committed adultery. And then quickly Jesus continues. And then you can imagine this hush. I can imagine it. This hush now kind of comes over the crowd. Because all of a sudden it's not just, oh, those are a few people who do those things. That's not me. This kind of religious superiority. All of a sudden, Jesus is now talking about lust and internal desire, and it gets quiet. Because for those original listeners and then the readers of early scripture, and even for us today, it changes from it being maybe about someone else to it probably being about us. It's about a conversation we need to stop and think about. And then Jesus continues. He says, so if your eye, even your good eye, causes you to lust, gouge it out and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And he says the same thing about the hand. Even if your stronger hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than your whole body to be thrown into hell. So when I was writing this talk this week, I always try to come up with something that makes me remember what I'm doing. So I was thinking about this passage, this idea that if your good eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out, or cut off your hand. And I immediately thought of these one-eyed pirates. It's like these people who have a patch now and only have one hand. It's like Jaime Lannister pirates. That's kind of what I was thinking about. It's my own weird mental hooks, but that's what I was thinking about. Because if we're all honest, that's what it would be. There'd be all these one-eyed, one-handed people walking around. But then when you think about it, if you only have one good eye, does that mean you no longer struggle with lust? No. If you only have one hand, does that mean you no longer struggle? No, right? So you'd have no eyes and no hands, and then you can imagine people's imaginations will still take it to the wrong place anyways. So it's not literally to be taken that way. Jesus isn't saying, go cut out your eye, cut off your hand. He's using a figure of speech where he's using exaggeration to emphasize this is how important it is. This is how much you need to pay attention to this. The right eye, the right hand were the most dominant. Probably most of us are, even today, are right-handed. How many left-handed folks do we have here? Okay, so we have a bunch, but clearly it's more right-handed. In certain different eras of history, if you were left-handed, had different kind of bad connotations. They would kind of force you into using your right hand. But right hand was considered the place of power and dominance. And even the right eye, there's some ancient writings where it seems to be this is about status and about position. So when Jesus is saying your proper, your good eye, your right hand, he's basically saying all these things that would define you, give you definition in terms of power and position and value. If they're going to cause you to stumble, it's better to get rid of those things. You'd be better off just to get rid of them. Again, using this sense of exaggeration in order to emphasize this is how important the conversation must be. So much so that he runs it to its full conclusion. It's like, if you don't do this, you're better to do this than to end up being thrown into hell. We talked about the idea of hell, Gehenna, a few weeks ago. We can talk about that more if you like later. But I just want to skip that part right now. Okay, how about we just leave it there? Because that kind of sets up the topic. Those few verses in Matthew chapter 5, you've heard it said, do not commit adultery. But I say to you, if you look at a woman with lust in your heart, then you've already committed adultery with her in your heart. And then Jesus uses that sense of exaggeration about you're better to gouge out your eye or cut off your hand than to kind of continue in that direction. Okay, what I want you to do is just to talk about that stuff. Questions that arise, ideas, things that stand out. What does it make you think about? What is the most important thing? Maybe as you're talking, what is the most important thing for us as a community to think about as we have this conversation? What does it mean for us today? What on earth does this look like for us today in our culture when we talk about sexuality and desire and lust, all those kinds of things? Okay? So this could go in a whole bunch of different directions, and I assume it will, but that's okay. So just circle up. If you're new here, we always like to have a conversation as much as we can. And so if you see someone who's not in a group, invite them to join your group. It can be like 3 or 4 people. It can be 10 people. It doesn't matter. Just circle up into groups. We're going to give you about 4 or 5 minutes to do that, and then I'll call you back together, and we'll chat about some of the things that stand out, okay? And then I have a few thoughts to share. All right, go for it. Hey, guys. Okay, going to bring you back together. Love to hear some of the things you were chatting about, as long as you feel comfortable to share it. Or if someone said something great in your group, you can either take credit or just say someone mentioned. But just speak it. If you're going to shout it out, just say it in a nice loud voice so everyone can kind of hear. And so what were we talking about? What did this make you think about or wonder about, or what's the most important piece here? Okay, we'll start here, Claire, and then come over here.
We were kind of talking about when he says, like, cut off your hand or gouge out your eye.
Yeah.
Talking about, like, just remove yourself from that setting. Like, try to stay away from those situations where you're lustful. Like, cut that out of your life.
Right.
Because maybe you're going to lose some things by cutting that out of your life, but you're going to gain a lot from maybe not having a relationship with the person because it's pushing you the wrong way, or going to places where, you know what I mean? So just try to avoid those settings where you have to make the choices.
It's great. Yeah, if the example is get rid of these parts of your body because it's better to be missing out on part of your body than to where it's going to go, you're totally right. So, yeah, so what does it look like then? Jesus uses those things to emphasize how important this conversation is and how much we need to pay attention to it. Then what are the things that we need to be willing to let go of, sever, cut off, remove from our regular rhythms and patterns so that we don't then find ourselves in those places? Yeah, it's really great. What else? Oh, Ryan, yeah.
So we talking about adultery, and when you said, like, popular culture, I thought about a tweet I saw this week where some journalist in the U.S. said, remember back in the day when a president of the United States, like Jimmy Carter, said, I'm an adulterous man. I was adulterous in my mind. Those were the good old days. This popular culture is Weinstein, it's Trump, all this sexism that's going on right now, and the difficulties. And poor Jimmy Carter was never appreciated as president. It was after his presidency, good Christian value man,
Right.
Happy humanity, all that stuff. Underappreciated. The other thing that was triggered there is back to my Rob Bell interest in his writings.
Ryan is a big Rob Bell.
I'm a big Rob Bell fan. Just kind of shift. He always seems to shift paradigm on kind of the literal aspects of the Bible. I mean, not unpack that, but something we're talking about is just God created us to be sexual beings, and it's how do you deal with that in Scripture, where in a typical church where it's something you don't talk about, but it's like almost like you have to be angelic versus animal, and Rob Bell talks about animalistic, but it's actually somewhere in between. Like, God created us with these body parts and the desires.
Yeah.
And how do we navigate that? And I know this is very much part of a marriage situation. But
Yeah, it's great.
it's a strong force.
Absolutely, yeah. God fully created us as sexual beings, and the impulses and the desires we have and the things we have, like, those are all, like, part of what it means to be human and to be able to express those things. And it's just the way we choose to express those things that's the conversation. And so when we say yes to following Jesus, and what we're doing is we're saying that all parts of our life come under the lordship of Jesus, and that affects our sexual expression as well. And then how do we do that? How do we carry that out? How do we express those things? Because in and of themselves they're not bad. I mean, if you've ever read the Song of Solomon and you talk about that poetic literature that describes the love that these two lovers have for each other, it's super like, I mean, they use some crazy wordplay and things like that, but it's super erotic and sensual, and it's a beautiful part of Scripture. Yeah, so thanks for saying that. It's not like we're trying to divorce the spiritual from the physical body. It's saying, what does it mean when we become integrated beings and submit our whole selves to Jesus, including our sexual beings? Yeah, at the back.
So I always get a little creeped out when I read stuff like this because I'm never sure if he's serious. But when I get beyond it, what I really struggled with was that the desires didn't change over time. But they did change. But what happened with this was as I thought of relationships and people that I deal with that I love, that became inconsistent to love them and have them be loved by Jesus and have me lust after them. And over time, the more I held that in my mind, thought about it, it's like the lust got cut off. That became the part that got cut off. And it's not like it has totally changed. I'm sure that if I was deep in my heart, I'm not going to have any problem finding lust at all. But it became easier, more habitual to love the more I watched Jesus love people around me.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think that's a perfect example of what stumbling forward in discipleship looks like. So, I guess the thought is total victory over lust possible? We would say yes. Has anyone ever achieved it? I would say I haven't met them. But I certainly have met people who would be way less ruled and defined by those inclinations than others, for sure. Because the wisdom and maturity in their life as they have experienced internal transformation, they're a different person now than they were years ago. So yeah, I think it's great that you raised that. It's like, if that is a part of our story, and most of us probably without nodding our heads now would say, yes, we struggle with that too. What does it look like for us to move forward in saying yes to Jesus and leave behind these kind of worldly ways of looking and viewing other people? I have a few thoughts to share on that coming up, but thanks for mentioning that. It's great. Yeah, Dave.
One thing tied to that I found helpful over the years, I've got a little phrase, word, an accurate HALT.
HALT, H-A-L-T.
Hungry, angry, lonely, or tired.
Hmm.
And in phases of my life or period of my day, or things that will caught, why am I thinking about this?
Right.
What of those four? Am I angry at something? I'm lonely, I deserve this, I'm tired,
Hmm.
no one will notice, I need a break. So it's been helpful for me to back up and start to look at those four things and say, okay, Lord, deal with that
Right.
first.
Hungry, angry, lonely, tired. So that speaks to what you guys were chatting about a little bit, but what are those warning signs, or what are those things you need to avoid? And potentially when you have those thoughts, you can maybe attribute it to, like, are these those things? What's popping up here that's leading me in that direction? Awesome, so good, so practical. Jody.
Yeah, to build on also what we were talking about at first, and this is also kind of my personal story, I can relate with Alex in a lot of what he was talking about, but it's kind of also being preemptive about things. Like for me, it's movies and television shows are riddled with stuff that I don't think as a Christian we need to be seeing, and it's so accepted in the secular world. Like, I'm just going to throw it out there, Game of Thrones.
Oh,
I've
what a
never
bad
even
reference I made
considered-
today.
I've never even considered watching it.
Yeah.
Now, because of my personal past,
Sure.
because it's going to be like a possible trigger. But it also, to me, that's the cutting off. Because I like TV shows and I like movies, and there's so many, even I'll be watching a season of a TV show and in episode 7 something happens. It's not even that bad, but it's something that's like, nope, if they're going to do this, that show is now gone.
Hmm.
And it's sad, because I'm like, darn, I was really enjoying it.
I was into
wanted
that.
to see where the story arc went.
Yeah.
But it's like, anyway, so that's sort of in relation to like, not even just get out of that spot. It's even like before we go to a movie, we go to the parents' rating guide, just to look and see what's in this
What's in
film.
it, yeah.
Because you can't always trust the ratings. And maybe it seems a bit juvenile, but at the same time, it's like, that's, I think, a necessary thing to acknowledge, depending on where you're at.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. I don't think it's juvenile at all. I think it's really shows wisdom and character and knowing who you are and knowing potential. And probably more of us should pay attention in a similar way. Thanks for sharing that.
Quick, I know you want to get going.
No.
But to just, no.
No, I don't. I'm fully invested in this moment.
But in the flip side, just in that where it says that the sin leads to death, wasn't a part of our discussion, but something I read a while ago, death doesn't have to be like physical death. It's like the death of something, the death of a relationship, the death of, if you look even at the recent allegations like Weinstein, the death of a career and the death of a reputation, like a public reputation. Even like Kevin Spacey, all the things that are dying related to Kevin Spacey. So for me, that was a big thing too, thinking like, oh, sin does really lead to death.
Yeah.
But it's not always like physical death. It can be the death of many, many good things in your life that are dying because of the sin. So, anyway, I thought.
Yeah, I think I fully agree with you. It's interesting, like, as different people share their stories and as people, to different degrees, are willing to be honest and vulnerable about a whole host of different parts of what it means to follow Jesus and struggles and ups and downs. I think the beauty of what some of that does for us is it normalizes conversation of victory and also failure, where it makes it easier for us to admit the things that we struggle with. Because often all this stuff we think happens in isolation because no one else wrestles or struggles with it. So we feel so lonely and on our own and feel shame to bring it up when really we need to have safe environments where people can be really honest about struggles or ways they've been hurt in this area. All those kinds of things need to be more a part of our regular rhythm of what it means, in appropriate ways, obviously, but I don't think we ever usually tip into the oversharing side. We normally tip into the side of secrecy and withdrawal. Maybe one more person, one more group want to share anything? Or I can go. Any thoughts? Okay, so here's a few thoughts from me. As I've been thinking a whole lot about this. This was honestly like a super emotional week for me in this text. Even yesterday, honestly, Bobby was out doing some errands, running around. I was like, Saturdays for me are always the days when I kind of take all the notes that I've been collecting. Some of it happens this week, the week of, and if I know where I'm going, I'll compile articles way ahead of time. So it's sifting through all that stuff that's in these folders and saying, like, what's the most important stuff for us to talk about? What do I sense God saying is the most important things for our community to talk about? And man, I had a heavy day yesterday. I felt like the extent of sexual brokenness around us. Oh man, like I share with you, like I was weeping at the table yesterday. It just kills me as someone who has my own struggles, someone who's had my own failures, as a dad, as a leader, on so many levels. I was just crying yesterday. And I'm trying to figure out I'm just kind of old and hormonal or something. I don't know. I don't know what it is. But I don't want to dismiss it and think, oh, it's just me. I think it's because it actually is a really, really important conversation for us to have. So I jotted down a few points that maybe are helpful in continuing the conversation. We want this to continue at our midweek groups this week. So as you're joining with your groups and having more of these conversations. But here's some things that hopefully help us move forward in this conversation. First one, this is not a problem of beauty, it's a problem of objectification. So adultery was considered such a serious offense because it broke relationship and covenant between people. And marriage in biblical terms was a kind of a way of looking at God's special relationship with his people. So any pursuit in a way that wasn't directed towards God, looking to fulfill desire in a different way, was viewed as adulterous, of breaking this covenant, breaking relationship in earthly relationships and spiritual relationships as well. And I fully believe that men and women struggle with lust in different ways, or maybe equally. I don't know. I'm only a guy. I don't know what that looks like for the sisters in the room. But I certainly want to talk to the guys in the room that we have to do so much better. We have to do so much better that when an image bearer of the divine, Imago Dei, is used for our own benefit or pleasure, we strip them of the way God has created them to be. And we begin looking at people as objects to fulfill our own desire, and it's so messed up and it's so wrong. And sadly, it's become so normal, almost like, what's the big deal? If I'm not acting on it, what's the big deal? And Jesus says, it is a big deal. It's the heart. It's the internal things. This is a huge deal. Jesus 100% calls us to a different standard than our culture. We often talk about, what does it mean to follow Jesus? And we want to let our light shine and all these great things. But this is a way we should be standing in stark contrast to our culture. the way we express our sexuality, the way we treat each other, the way we honor and revere each other and champion each other. And so I don't know what it's like for women. I know lust is a human thing, but guys, man, we have to do so much better because we fail our sisters in so many ways. So as husbands and as fathers, as brothers, we need to do better. Scott McKnight in his commentary says, he, meaning Jesus, lays full responsibility in this text on the male and expects males to be able to control their desires. In other words, a text like the non-canonical Testament of Reuben, so this is not part of the Bible, but this is illustrating kind of what he means. This places the problem in the wrong place. So in that Testament of Reuben, it says this: women contrive in their hearts against men, then by decking themselves out, they lead men's minds astray. By a look, they implant their poison, and finally, in the act itself, they take them captive. Jesus prevents a blame her looks or "but she enticed me" approach. The problem in our text is a male desire. You can't blame the other person. This is a heart issue for us. We have to deal with the heart issue. So, number one, I would say it's not an issue of beauty, a problem of beauty, it's a problem of objectification. When we look to strip people of the way they bear the image of the divine and we try to take advantage of them for our own desire, it's messed, and we have to talk about it, and we have to do better. Number two, the call to follow Jesus is a call to leave the world behind. We talk about this in all aspects of discipleship. Even in this, when we say yes to Jesus and we submit ourselves under the lordship of Jesus, our life and our actions and our motives and the way we make decisions all needs to fall under the lordship of Jesus. And it is a different ethic. It's a different way, and we have to take this seriously. Much of what Jesus calls us to is a purity, of a renewed purity, a sense of not being corrupted and influenced and shaped by the things our world would say. But that's fine, everybody's doing it. And sadly, I would say the church, in many ways, has kind of gotten away from that, thinking that sexual expression is no big deal outside of a marriage covenant. It's like, but I'm probably going to marry that person, or I'm thinking about these, like I really, really care. But if we want to talk about sexual expression, it's within the commitment of a marriage relationship. So anyways, I'll leave that. The last thing I guess a number of you have referred to is just the prevalence of all the stories that have been coming out lately. So back, I guess it was in October that the Me Too campaign happened, hashtag happened, and Alyssa Milano, the actress, kind of got this going, trying to... At first I thought it was her. She got it going, I thought, to raise awareness, and the Harvey Weinstein stuff, who was like a Hollywood mogul. You guys probably all know about this stuff. Talking about sexual harassment and abuse and ways men have used power to dominate over women and take advantage of them. And they were trying to encourage women to say, hey, use the hashtag MeToo to say how maybe it's affected you, but also to kind of take back the power and say, I've been affected by this too, and we need to show the scope and the reach of how broken this whole thing is. And the more people that would contribute and add their voice to it just shows the spread of this disease. And honestly, it went all around the world. Millions and millions of people either reshared or added it. And I remember going through my feed and seeing like women I love and friends of mine, sometimes with comments, sometimes without, say, hashtag Me Too. And man, the brokenness is just so rampant. But then as I began doing more reading, I found out this hashtag Me Too thing isn't like a new thing that happened in October. It actually started over 10 years ago by a social activist. You guys may or may not know this. I just want to read this story. You may say, I don't know why you read that, so maybe this is a mistake. But I want to read this. This is how the Me Too movement actually started over 10 years ago as a response to victims of abuse and harassment and saying this is not okay. So this is from the person who originally started it. Her name is Tanara Burke. She says this. It's a little bit long, but let me just read you the story. She says, the Me Too movement started in the deepest, darkest place of my soul. As a youth worker dealing predominantly with children of color, I had seen and heard my share of heartbreaking stories from broken homes to abusive or neglectful parents when I met Heaven. During an all-girl bonding session at our youth camp, several of the girls in the room shared intimate stories about their lives. Some were the tales of normal teenage angst, and others were quite painful. Just as I had done so many times before, I sat and listened to the stories and comforted the girls as needed. When it was over, the adults advised the young women to reach out to us in the event that they needed to talk some more or needed something else. And then we went our separate ways. The next day, Heaven, who had been in the previous night's session, asked to speak with me privately. Heaven was a sweet-faced little girl who kind of clung to me throughout the camp. However, her hyperactive and often anger-filled behavior betrayed both her name and light, high-pitched voice, and I was frequently pulling her out of some type of situation. As she attempted to talk to me that day, though the look in her eyes sent me in the other direction. She had a deep sadness and a yearning for confession that I read immediately and I wanted no part of. Finally, later in the day, she caught up with me and almost begged me to listen, and I reluctantly conceded. Over the next several minutes, this child, Heaven, struggled to tell me about her stepdaddy, or rather her mother's boyfriend, who was doing all sorts of monstrous things to her body. I was horrified by her words. The emotions welling up inside of me ran the gamut, and I listened until I literally could take it no more, which turned out to be less than 5 minutes. Then right in the middle of her sharing her pain with me, I cut her off and immediately directed her to another female counselor who could help her better. I will never forget the look on her face. I will never forget the look because I think about her all the time. The shock of being rejected, the pain of opening a wound, only to have it abruptly forced closed again. It was all over her face. As much as I love children, as much as I care about that child, I could not find the courage that she had found. I could not muster the energy to tell her that I understood, that I connected, and I could feel her pain. I couldn't help her release her shame or impress upon her that nothing had happened to her that was her fault. I could not find the strength to say out loud the words that were ringing in my head over and over again as she tried to tell me what she had endured. I watched her walk away from me as she tried to recapture her secrets and tuck them back into their hiding place. I watched her put her mask back on and walk back into the world like she was all alone, and I couldn't even bring myself to whisper, "Me too." She goes on to say, the hashtag #MeToo wasn't built to be a viral campaign or a hashtag that is here today and forgotten tomorrow. It was a catchphrase to be used from survivor to survivor to let folks know that they are not alone and that the movement for radical healing was happening and possible. So yesterday, as I'm sitting at my table and I'm thinking about that any kind of expression that God created to be good and beautiful and wonderful, when allowed to be corrupt and go its own way, leads to such brokenness and pain and destruction, and it's not okay. And remembering the feed of friends and people I love, both men and women actually, because as that movement got started, hundreds of thousands of men joined in and added their voice, not to take it over, but to also stand in solidarity and say, "Me too." And so as I were thinking about the friends yesterday, I was just like, my heart was breaking because of how painful this whole thing is and how run amok our version of sexuality is and our misappropriate desires and how we just look to take from people. And so if you are here and you've been hurt or a victim, I am so sorry. I don't know what more to say, but I'm so sorry. I feel like I just want to stop and lament. It's not okay. It's not your fault. I'm so sorry for the way other people have hurt you. And I have no idea what this lady's view on faith is or anything like that, but when she talks about this hashtag being a way for victims to be able to look at each other and know that hope is possible, I also think about the way hope is possible for us as followers of Jesus. That there's something actually more, and thank God for that. I believe there's hope and healing and the opportunity to find a better way, not forgetting or dismissing what's happened, but by finding healing and moving forward, redeemed, and with God's help. So this comes down to the way we talk, the way we joke, the choices we make, the way we make other people feel. It's stepping into places and bringing peace and being an advocate for those who are being victimized. It's all these things. We have to do better. When we think about being a light on a hill, like we talked about a number of weeks ago, we think of like all these great things of like putting the light on the stand and so that everyone will see. Man, wouldn't it be great to be known as a church where there's safety and healing and hope for people even in this area of their life? And we have to be honest that it's not an other person's issue, it's an our issue, and we have to own that and deal with it ourselves. And I think about living as light, and I just want to read this from Ephesians 5. So Paul's writing to the church. He says this, watch what God does, and then you do it, like children who learn proper behavior from their parents. Mostly what God does is love you. Keep company with him, and learn a life of love. Observe how Christ loved us. His love was not cautious, but extravagant. He did not love in order to get something from us, but to give everything of himself to us. Love like that. Don't allow love to turn into lust, setting off a downhill slide through sexual promiscuity, filthy practice, or bullying greed. Though some tongues just love to taste the taste of gossip, those who follow Jesus have better uses for language than that. Don't talk dirty or silly. That kind of talk doesn't fit our style. Thanksgiving is our dialect. You can be sure that using people or religion or things just for what you can get out of them, the usual variations on idolatry, will get you nowhere, and certainly nowhere near the kingdom of Christ, the kingdom of God. Don't let yourselves get taken in by religious smooth talk. God gets furious with people who are full of religious sales talk but want nothing to do with him. Don't even hang around people like that. You groped your way through that murk once, but no longer. You're out in the open now. The bright light of Christ makes your way plain. So no more stumbling around. Get on with it. The good, the right, the true. These are the actions appropriate for daylight hours. Figure out what will please Christ, and then do it. In chapter 4, Paul says, with the Lord's authority I say this, live no longer as the Gentiles do, for they are hopelessly confused. Their minds are full of darkness. They wander far from the life God gives because they have closed their minds and hardened their hearts. They have no sense of shame. They live for lustful pleasure and eagerly practice every kind of impurity. But that isn't what you learned about Christ. Since you've heard about Jesus and learned the truth that comes from him, throw off your old sinful nature, your former way of life, which is corrupt by lust and deception. Instead, let the Spirit renew your thoughts and attitudes. Put on your new nature, created to be like God, truly righteous and holy. So even as Alex shared, there's this process of admitting we need help and then inviting God into those places. Like sometimes we say, hey, where are those places of brokenness that you just need to invite Jesus into? And we're so good at saying, hey, you can have access to this or this or this. Whoa, but not that. Because we kind of want to hang on to that little bit because we kind of really like that. We like living the old way with that part of our life. And the call is to allow Jesus to have access to all that allowing his Spirit to bring hope and healing into those places of hurt and pain and brokenness, or those places where we know we're living in a way that is contrary to the way of Jesus. So here's what we're going to do. We're just going to be quiet. We're going to listen. We're going to pray. And then when we're done, I'll close us off on that. Justin and the crew are going to lead us in some songs. As usual, there's communion. But before you come and take the elements, just take a minute to pray. Pray for people who need help. Pray for people you know who need healing. Maybe that's you. If you need to confess something, confess. If you need to talk with someone, talk with someone. It doesn't have to be right now, but set up a time to get together with someone. When we bring these things out into the light, it gives God an opportunity to bring healing. Sorry if I've been so heavy. I'm not trying to be. Yeah, let's just be quiet for a minute. I don't know what God's saying to you. I don't know what's important for you to hear. Maybe none of this. Maybe something else, I'm not sure. But let's think about these things, about purity, about hanging on to the things of Christ, about healing and hope. So take a minute. So God, this is a heavy topic. Maybe it's just heavy, feels heavy for me. I don't know. I'm not trying to put my own personal things in front of the need of the community. But I do think it's an important conversation for us to have about purity and honoring you with all parts of our life. And we all have experienced brokenness in different ways by choices we've made or things that we had no control over that were done to us. And so, God, I just invite you into those painful places and ask for help and healing and hope. For unresolved things, God, just help us to get the support we need and the people around us to encourage us forward. God, my heart just breaks for how this, like Jody was saying, brings death and pain and separation and messes up relationships. And God, we want to move in the direction of hope and healing and honoring you with those parts of our life too. That it's not just about external actions. Well, I didn't do that, or I didn't do that. But it's the attitude and the desire of our heart. What does that reveal about us? And so, God, we invite you into those places. And for those places where we've made choices and mistakes now that we're not proud of, God, we confess those to you. And we ask for your forgiveness and your healing. Give us courage to talk to other people, to bring the things that have been hidden in the shadows into the light. Help us to know we're not alone. Help us to extend forgiveness to each other and to listen and to be safe places for each other. As we come around the table now, we remind ourselves of the one who gives his life for us. Jesus, through your death and resurrection, we have possible for kingdom life, for a new way of being and a new identity. And so we celebrate as we take these elements and what they mean for us. God, thank you for this community. We can have honest conversation. Thank you for the things you're doing here. Let us be a light. And let us be willing to surrender those places in our life that need you the most even today.